Berlin, April 1945. The city, once a symbol of power and ambition, now stood on the edge of oblivion. The world outside its battered walls was changing forever, but inside Berlin, time seemed to slow, every moment heavy with dread and uncertainty. Imagine, if you will, a city crumbling under the weight of war, streets that once bustled with life now echoed with the distant thunder of artillery and the cries of the wounded. The familiar landmarks of Berlin, its grand avenues, its proud monuments, were reduced to little more than shattered stone and twisted metal. Buildings lay in ruins, scarred by bombs and fire. Entire neighborhoods had vanished beneath mountains of debris, their names remembered only by those who once called them home. The city's skyline, once a testament to human achievement, was now jagged and broken, silhouetted against a sky choked with smoke. The air was thick with smoke and, honestly, the stench of death. Every breath was a reminder of the destruction that had been unleashed. The sun, when it managed to break through the haze, cast an eerie, unnatural light over the ruins, making the city feel even more alien and forsaken. This was Berlin in its final days, a city teetering on the brink of collapse. The once vibrant heart of Germany was now a ghostly shell, its people haunted by memories of what had been and terrified of what was still to come. The once proud capital of the Third Reich was now a desolate wasteland, its streets just littered with rubble and fear. Every corner, every alley seemed to whisper stories of loss and desperation. The city's spirit, battered but not yet broken, clung to the hope that somehow survival was still possible. For weeks, the relentless rumble of Soviet artillery had echoed through the shattered remains of the city. The ground trembled with each explosion, and the night sky was lit by the constant flashes of gunfire. The siege was unending, a drumbeat of doom that grew louder with every passing hour. Each shell brought the Red Army closer, their advance just as unstoppable as a force of nature. The Soviets moved block by block, street by street, overwhelming the last pockets of resistance. For Berliners, the sound of approaching tanks and the sight of advancing soldiers meant that the end was near. Desperate German defenders scrambled to build makeshift barricades using whatever materials they could find, furniture, sandbags, even the stones of their own ruined homes, but their efforts were little more than gestures against the overwhelming might of the Soviet onslaught. Inside the Führer bunker, a subterranean world of concrete and despair, Adolf Hitler, the architect of this destruction, clung to the delusional belief that Germany could still triumph. Surrounded by loyalists and haunted by betrayal, he issued orders that no longer had any hope of being carried out. But on the streets above, reality painted a very different picture. The city's survivors moved like shadows through the ruins, searching for food, water, and any sign of safety. Every day was a struggle, every night a test of endurance. Berlin's remaining defenders, a ragtag mix of weary soldiers and terrified civilians, braced themselves for the inevitable. Many were teenagers or old men, pressed into service in a last, desperate attempt to hold the line. Their faces showed exhaustion, but also a grim determination to protect what little remained. Among them were ordinary Berliners, mothers, children, old men, trapped in a nightmare they never could have imagined. Families huddled together in basements, listening to the distant roar of battle, praying for a miracle that would never come. In the shelters and cellars, neighbors shared what little food they had left, forging bonds of solidarity in the face of unimaginable hardship. Even as hope faded, acts of kindness and courage flickered in the darkness. Their stories, tales of courage, despair, and desperate hope, would come to define the fall of Berlin, a pivotal moment that marked the end of World War II in Europe and really the dawn of a new era. In the ashes of defeat, the seeds of a new future were sown, one shaped by the lessons, the losses, and the resilience of those who endured the siege. As April dawned, the grip of the Red Army tightened around Berlin. The city, once the proud heart of the Third Reich, now found itself encircled and suffocating under the relentless pressure of Soviet forces. The thunder of artillery echoed day and night, shaking the very foundations of the city and signaling the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Soviet forces, under the command of the ruthless and determined Marshal Georgy Zhukov, had fought their way across Eastern Europe, their advance fueled by a burning desire for revenge for Nazi atrocities. Every step forward was paid for in blood, but the Red Army pressed on, driven by memories of devastation in their own homeland and the promise of final victory over Hitler. From the east, Zhukov's armies surged forward, while to the south, Marshal Ivan Konev's troops added their might to the assault. The Soviets executed a massive pincer movement, closing in on Berlin from multiple directions, leaving the defenders with nowhere to run and no hope of relief. The city was now a fortress under siege, its fate sealed by the overwhelming numbers and firepower of the Red Army. The German defense, commanded by the loyal but outmatched General Helmuth Weidling, was crumbling rapidly. Weidling faced an impossible task: to hold the city with dwindling resources, shattered morale, and a force that was a shadow of its former self. The defenders were exhausted, their lines stretched thin, and every street became a battleground. Weidling had few experienced soldiers at his disposal, his ranks filled with old men and young boys barely old enough to hold a rifle. The Volkssturm, a desperate last-ditch militia, was made up of civilians pressed into service, many of whom had never seen combat before. Their faces betrayed fear and uncertainty as they waited for the inevitable onslaught. Yet he vowed to defend the city to the last man, clinging to the faint hope that a miracle could somehow materialize from the ruins. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, Weidling tried to inspire his men, urging them to hold their ground and resist the Soviet advance, even as the city around them was reduced to rubble. Within the Führer bunker, the atmosphere was a toxic mix of delusion and despair. Deep beneath the shattered streets, Hitler and his inner circle clung to fantasies of salvation, even as reality closed in from all sides. The bunker, once a symbol of Nazi power, had become a tomb of paranoia and fear. Hitler, his health failing and his mind unhinged, refused to countenance the possibility of defeat. Isolated from the suffering above, he raged against his generals and blamed everyone but himself for the disaster that had befallen Germany. His physical decline was matched only by his growing detachment from reality. He issued a stream of nonsensical orders, clinging to the belief that the German people would rise up and repel the invaders. In his mind, phantom armies still existed, and victory was just one bold counterattack away. His generals, exhausted and disillusioned, could only watch as their leader spiraled further into delusion. But his words rang hollow in the hearts of those who had witnessed the horrors he had unleashed upon the world. In the dim light of the bunker, hope had all but vanished, replaced by a grim acceptance of the inevitable. Outside, the city burned and its people suffered, while inside, the last days of the Third Reich played out in a tragic, desperate farce. By April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, Soviet artillery was raining down on the city center. The thunder of distant guns was relentless, echoing through the shattered streets and reverberating off the ruins of what had once been the proud capital of the Third Reich. The Red Army was closing in from all sides, their advance unstoppable, their determination fueled by years of brutal conflict and unimaginable loss. Berlin, once a symbol of Nazi power, was now a city on the brink of total collapse, its people cowering in basements and shelters as the world above them was reduced to rubble. The Führer bunker, deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, shook with each blast. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and fear. The walls, meant to protect, now felt like a tomb, sealing its occupants away from the dying world above. Every explosion sent tremors through the bunker, a constant reminder that the end was drawing near. It was a grim birthday celebration for the man who had dreamt of ruling Europe, a stark reminder of the destruction he had wrought. The bunker was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional murmur of anxious voices. There was no joy, no laughter, only the hollow ritual of marking another year in the shadow of defeat. The small cake, hastily prepared, seemed almost mocking in its normalcy, a cruel contrast to the devastation outside. Hitler, pale and trembling, emerged from his private quarters to greet a handful of loyal followers. His movements were slow, his posture stooped, the weight of impending doom pressing down on him. The men who gathered around him were a mix of the fanatically devoted and the quietly despairing, each one acutely aware that the world they had built was crumbling before their eyes. Gone was the charismatic leader who had once mesmerized the German nation. The fiery orator who had commanded stadiums and armies was now a shadow of his former self, his voice reduced to a hoarse whisper, his gestures feeble and uncertain. The transformation was stark, a living testament to the corrosive power of hubris and the relentless march of time. In his place stood a broken man, his face etched with paranoia and despair. His eyes darted nervously, haunted by visions of betrayal and defeat. The once iron-willed dictator was now consumed by fear, his mind unraveling under the pressure of imminent catastrophe. Every wrinkle, every tremor spoke of sleepless nights and the crushing realization that his empire was finished. He spoke of treachery, of enemies within, his voice a low rasp that just echoed the bunker's oppressive atmosphere. Accusations flew as he ranted about betrayal by his generals, by the German people, by fate itself. The atmosphere in the bunker was suffocating, thick with suspicion and dread, as those around him listened in silence, unsure whether to fear the enemy outside or the man before them. Despite the dire situation, Hitler clung to his delusions, convinced that Germany could still achieve victory. He pored over maps, tracing imaginary counterattacks and last-minute rescues, refusing to accept the reality that surrounded him. His determination bordered on madness, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, to find hope where none remained. He issued a series of increasingly desperate orders, dispatching phantom armies and non-existent divisions to bolster the crumbling defenses. His aides scrambled to carry out his commands, knowing full well that the resources he demanded no longer existed. The gap between Hitler's fantasies and the grim reality outside grew wider with each passing hour, yet no one dared to confront him with the truth. His generals, once blindly obedient, now faced a grim choice: follow the orders of a madman or try to salvage something from the wreckage of the Third Reich. Some clung to loyalty, others to hope, but most simply waited, trapped in the bunker with the man who had led them to ruin. As the walls shook and the world outside burned, the final act of Hitler's regime played out in darkness and despair, a tragic end to a nightmare that had consumed a continent. On April 20th, the Red Army unleashed a thunderous artillery barrage, signaling the start of the final assault on Berlin. The earth trembled, buildings crumbled, and the sky turned a sickly yellow-green as thousands of shells rained down upon the city. It was a scene of unimaginable destruction, a vision of hell unleashed on Earth. Soviet tanks, spearheaded by the legendary T-34s, rumbled through the shattered streets, their tracks crushing the debris of a fallen empire. They encountered fierce resistance from German defenders, determined to fight for every inch of their shattered capital. Street by street, building by building, a brutal battle for survival raged. Amidst the chaos and carnage, ordinary Berliners huddled in cellars and makeshift shelters, praying for the nightmare to end. Families huddled together, sharing meager rations and offering each other words of comfort. They listened in terror as the battle raged above, the sounds of gunfire and explosions a constant reminder of the danger lurking just outside their fragile sanctuary. As the days blurred into nights, the fighting intensified. Soviet soldiers, hardened by years of brutal warfare, fought with a ferocity born of vengeance and a desire to end the war that had cost them so dearly. They faced determined resistance from German soldiers, many of them teenagers or old men, fighting with the courage of desperation. The streets of Berlin became a nightmarish labyrinth of rubble, burning buildings and shattered lives. Snipers lurked in bombed-out buildings, picking off soldiers and civilians alike. Food and water were scarce, and the stench of death permeated the air. Hospitals, overwhelmed with casualties, became little more than makeshift morgues. Amidst this inferno, stories of human resilience and despair played out. A young German soldier, barely out of his teens, shared his last piece of bread with a terrified elderly woman. A Soviet medic, risking his own life, dashed across a street swept by gunfire to tend to a wounded German soldier. In the darkest depths of human depravity, flickers of compassion and humanity still burned.